think finally they just said enough.
Yeah, yeah.
They were done with Barron's and all their friends going to movies for free and stuff, you know.
Welcome to Commercially Speaking. I'm Timmy Barron.
And I'm Bo Barron.
Bo Barron, CCIM. I have ADHD. You and I grew up not having to pay for a movie ticket.
Oh, and I didn't even remember that one.
Yeah. We grew up being able to eat at Great Harvest Bread Company.
Fools are
Free. Same with Papa Murphy's.
Let's tell some stories.
I love a good story time.
Let's tell some stories about some unique negotiations.
Okay.
So I'll start with, for a while, this was the biggest deal of my career. And then I've got some other stories that I think are just fun, especially some of the things that our dad did when we were younger.
Like some of the perks of growing up in our family.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. And there's probably more than you even realize.
Yeah, there might be. But like just to hook people in. You and I grew up not having to pay for a movie ticket.
Oh, and I didn't even remember that one.
Yeah. We grew up being able to eat at Great Harvest Bread Company whenever we wanted, for the most part.
Free.
For free. Same with Papa Murphy's. We can go pick up a pizza at any moment for free.
Mm-hmm.
We just put it on the Barron account. So yeah, we're going to talk about how and why that was possible.
Yeah.
Through creative negotiating.
Yep, that's a good way to put it, through creative negotiation. Now, before we get into those kind of fun family stories,
sure.
There's this one particular deal. It's a 172-unit apartment complex, and I was representing the buyer. This gets a little complicated, so I'm going to try to tell it in a way that just makes some sense. But Imagine this. There was a...
and this is you as a broker,
I'm
right?
a broker.
Not a sponsor of a deal.
Yeah, this was not a syndication.
Yeah.
I was representing a single individual who liked to own apartments and was really good at operating them. And he wanted to buy these apartments. He called me up. He said, look, I'd like you to reach out to these owners and see if they'd sell. They were out of state, and it turns out they were interested in selling.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the deal ended up being about $8 million. Okay. But at the time, I forget what year this was. This is at least 10 years ago. At the time, the debt on the deal was $5.2 million. And you could not pay the loan off. So my buyer would have to assume the loan. All right. Now, the loan terms were good. The issue was, on an $8 million deal, if you can assume 5.2, what do you have to bring to the deal?
Cash.
$2.8 million.
Yeah.
The current loan in place stipulated that you could not add debt to the deal.
Ah.
So the sellers had a problem. Their property was worth about $8 million. My client was willing to pay about $8 million. No problem there. Okay?
Wow.
But they had to assume the loan, $5.2 million, which means my buyer had to bring $2.8 million cash, couldn't bring new debt, couldn't mezzanine finance, couldn't do any of these other things, had to bring cash to the deal.
What does assume the loan mean?
It means the same loan that's on, let's just use your house for an example.
Okay.
All right. You have a mortgage on that?
Yes.
If you were to sell it to me, I would pay you money. You would pay off your mortgage, and then I would get my own mortgage.
Oh, okay.
Right? If I assumed your loan, I would keep your mortgage in place, and now instead of you paying that thing, I pay that thing under the existing terms.
Okay.
All right.
So basically, the debt is just transferring over to
from the seller to the buyer. The debt remains the same.
Okay. So basically what you're not able to do is pay off that debt on different terms or without a prepayment penalty, maybe.
Yeah, and maybe it was because the prepayment penalty was so onerous. Maybe it was so harsh that it just killed the deal. It wouldn't happen. But it could be assumed. But you couldn't add to the debt. You know, an existing loan can have certain terms and whatever.
Yeah.
I never got a look at the loan terms themselves.
Okay.
However, here's the problem that the sellers had. The buyer had to assume the loan for whatever reason, and the buyer had to be wealthy enough that they had about $3 million in cash laying around.
Hey.
And how many of those people you know?
No,
I mean, I know some high net worth individuals, but they don't have $3 million cash. And if they did, they wouldn't want to put it all in one place in one property, you know. And the other problem that the seller had was a real estate investment trust, a REIT, which is essentially a fund, like a big syndication fund. We've been talking about syndications on other episodes. It's the type of deal where you raise the money first in a fund.
Yes, right.
And then you go buy the properties. Okay. Now REITs they'd have that kind of money. They'd be able to assume the loan and have that kind of money. But they generally don't care, at least at the time, they didn't care much about deals that were under $10 million.
Yeah, okay.
And they preferred towns that were bigger than Owensboro.
Mm-hmm.
So the REITs are kind of out. So if my sellers are going to sell, it's probably not going to be a REIT, and they need somebody that has about $3 million of cash.
Yeah.
How many of those people you know? So what we were able to do in this particular case is another friend of mine had just sold his business and was flush with cash, and he was interested in commercial real estate, but he wasn't good at it yet. Like, he didn't have experience. He might have been great from the jump, but he didn't have experience in the commercial real estate space yet.
Right.
He's a great operator of a business. He just sold it. He had a lot of money, but he was interested. And so I thought, man, if my buyer and my buddy could get along well, he has the cash to put it in the deal, and that would solve the problem.
Right, because so the buyer did not have the $2-3 million in cash.
Not in cash. He wasn't that liquid.
Yeah,
He was worth well more than that.
But yeah,
but for him to, he would have to sell stuff to free up that cash. He didn't want to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And my buddy just sold his company and hadn't put that money anywhere yet, so it was liquid. It was laying there. And so I pitched my buyer. I was like, look, I got a buddy. He just sold his business. He's got the kind of cash we need to do this deal. I want to introduce you to him. If you guys can get along, if you can align on your vision for the property, maybe that solves the problem.
Right.
And so we drove to Bowling Green where this buyer was and spent like half a day together, and they kind of hit it off. They liked each other. They spent some more time together and structured a partnership deal that they both liked.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening is we were able to close the deal. All right, that worked. And my buddy got to learn how to run apartments from a great operator.
Yeah.
And it really helped him redeploy his funds from selling the business into commercial real estate. And he's been very, very successful. And a lot of it has to do is he was able to learn from his new partner.
Right.
In that deal that they did. And so that was just a kind of a creative problem solving. The issue wasn't negotiating the price.
Right.
It was, man, we've got this funky loan that doesn't allow us normal options. Where do we build the funds that it'll take to put in? And it was just pulling in a partner. And they had a deal where as soon as he could refinance out of that loan, he could pay my buddy off and get him out of the deal, because he's not a partnership guy.
Yeah.
And so for a period of time to solve this problem, he took on a partner. It actually worked really well. They got along. They were able to learn from each other, and that really worked out.
Yeah.
So
win-win.
And I remember thinking, and at the time it was the biggest fee of my career.
Yeah.
So it was a win-win.
Yeah.
That was a good day.
You're like, you were a matchmaker. Matchmaker.
Yeah, that's really what it was in that case. And so playing the role of the broker in that case was kind of like being a little bit of a business Cupid.
That's right. Yeah, you set them up on a blind date.
That's really interesting. I never really thought about it that way, but it's funny the hats you'll wear as a commercial real estate broker sometimes. Yeah.
Especially when you don't have your typical options. You saw leverage in other places because he wanted to learn with this guy.
Oh, sure. Sure.
To become a smooth operator.
Yeah.
Apartments, right?
I like how you threw in a little Michael Jackson there.
Yeah.
That was nice. But yeah, my buddy, not only did he make a good return on his money, putting it in the deal for a period of just a couple of years, the buyer refinanced, paid him off, and he made money.
Yeah.
But man, he got to learn, and he was interested. He wanted to get in that space, and it was kind of like he'd worked for this company for years. He bought it from his dad, and then he sold it, and then it was like all of a sudden he's in his 50s, and what, am I going to play golf all the time? Like, he was looking for the next thing, and this was a great on-ramp to commercial real estate for him. And he might have done a deal or two before that. It wasn't anything as management intensive as being a great operator of apartment communities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that worked out really well.
Is he still in that circle?
My buddy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he owns a lot of commercial real estate now.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, like he's been very successful.
How was he in your mind when you were thinking about, because this is another question about like your network, right? Networking, who you know, what's going on. For him to serendipitously be the solution, I guess my question is, how do you know him? And how did you know about that?
I knew him from both, being in business in Owensboro. I think he went to church with us for a while, so I'd see him on the weekends, and we had lunch a couple times, and there's probably something else that connected us. But we just developed somewhat of a friendship over time, and he'd call me sometimes with questions, and when this opportunity came up, or really I was looking around thinking, where are we going to find $3 million?
Right.
And then it was like this dropped in our lap. And because the relationship was already there, and there was at least a certain amount of trust between me and my buddy, I was like, hey, I know we've been talking a little bit about commercial real estate. There's an opportunity here. It's way further, way faster than you may have anticipated, but it could be a really good opportunity. And I just sort of gave him the scenario. I was like, would you at least want to meet this guy and spend a little time with him and see what happens?
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I think I would. And then I called the buyer and I was like, look, I might have a solution for us. I know you don't like partnerships, but here's kind of this guy's situation. And, if you'd at least be willing to spend a little time with him, let's just see if we get along. He might be the 2-3 year partner you need to get past this date so you can refinance this nasty loan out. And he might be more than willing to put a couple $1 million in the deal and then get it back in a couple of years and go away to the next thing.
Sure.
And that's just kind of how it happened. But sometimes it's just keeping your eyes open. I say, look, this is what we need some way to source a couple $1 million in liquid cash.
Right.
Where on earth could that come from? And you just look around.
It seemed like he was on top of mind because he'd reached out to you, knowing that you're in commercial real estate, and he's got a bit of an interest in getting to know commercial real estate. Like, that conversation would have been had,
I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year ahead of time.
Right. Does that go into a Rolodex, or is that just in your head?
We use a CRM, which is customer relationship management software, and there's all kinds of them. We use one called RealNex, and the way it's supposed to work is you have a conversation with somebody, and you just put some notes in about that conversation. Therefore, I don't have to keep it up here. And when I was in my 20s, I felt like nothing ever slipped out of my brain.
Yeah.
I felt like I could recall everything that if I needed to go back into the mental Rolodex, that information was crisp and it was there.
Yeah.
Well, at age 46, it's not like that anymore.
No.
And I don't know if I hit capacity at some point or if it just ages, but I need something else to be my digital brain. And so, we try to keep notes on our conversations in a CRM system.
Yeah, gotcha.
And that way I can go back. And my guess is this guy was top of mind enough to me that we had kind of a budding friendship, and when I thought about it in terms of we need to find a couple $1 million. Who's got it? I bet I thought of him pretty quick. He was just kind of top of mind with me at the time. But
And after doing that deal, have you changed anything from what you learned there as far as like, I'm going to make better notes on who I know has cash if this situation comes up in the future? Or was it just like such a rare situation, you just took it as it came?
Probably more option B. Like, it was a pretty rare situation. Like, we haven't done another deal that played out like that before. And look, in Owensboro, Kentucky, and most of our deals are under $1 million. So an $8 million deal was, and I couldn't believe I was working on an $8 million deal at the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time I'm trying to help somebody figure out how to come up with $400,000, not $3 million or, So it's a lot easier to do when there's less zeros.
Right.
But
yeah,
but the better you keep notes, and look, brokers as an industry are generally, all right, I'm not talking about you, but generally they're kind of lazy, heavy on relationships, can be kind of salesy, but we can be nervous about the future. And so we're not known for being great record keepers.
Yeah.
We're not known for keeping detailed notes on every conversation. It's really hard to get people to do that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of value in it if you can figure out an efficient way to do that. Easy way to kind of search for that information after you put it in. These CRMs help with that, but they're hard to adopt sometimes because they can be complicated, and some folks just don't even want to take the time to learn how to do it. And so it's a really good option if you can get yourself to do it. And I tend to be geeky enough where I'll utilize that type of software, and it benefits me in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you brought that up the percentage of brokers that tend to be lazy. Why is that such a trap, particularly in this market or this career?
I don't know how I'd answer that. A lot of it just has to do maybe with who the industry attracts. So look, you can get into commercial real estate, especially as a broker. You don't need a degree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to have a GED. You have to be 18, and you have to pass a couple classes
Mm-hmm.
and a test. You can get your license. You can do what I do.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
The barrier to entry is low. The rewards are pretty high. So you can see guys make really good incomes, drive really nice cars. And so if you're attracted to a low barrier of entry with high income potential, and like you care about status and a certain amount of freedom, and you have certain loquaciousness, if that's even a word, you know, if you've got the gift of gab and you can sell popsicle to an Eskimo, and
Yeah.
you know, you might be drawn to this because of its rewards and because of the force of your personality, and maybe not because of your work ethic.
Yeah.
So I think in some respects, the industry attracts some people that might have leaned on their looks or their personality, and not on their work ethic. It might just attract those folks.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people in our industry that will treat this like a hobby more than a business.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're not willing to spend on marketing or tools or whatever. And I get it to some extent, because it can be tricky being a broker when you don't always know when your next paycheck's going to come. Might be a really nice paycheck, but you might have to wait 3 months to get it. So it's hard to spend on expenses and really treat your business like a business.
Right.
But
I get it.
kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it may not be that much different than, you know, the cash flow experience you have as an actor.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, it's the same parallels. You don't know when the next paycheck's coming. You, especially if somebody has an agent, right? You're just kind of sitting back waiting for them to call you to get you into the room, right? We got to audition for you. Rather than the percentage of actors that go out and create their own stuff, you know, doing a solo show or creating their own opportunities, getting up on stage and working on their craft in other ways. I mean, it's very, very...
Yeah. Well, I do have a question for you.
Okay.
When you get an agent as an actor, do you give up the ability to go make your own opportunities? Do you have to, like, can you, we'll make phone calls to property owners to try to find opportunities where we can list and sell property or lease somebody's space up or whatever their needs are.
Sure.
Do you get to prospect casting directors or?
Yeah. So to a degree, so let's say Claire Simon, she casts the Chicago show, Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, and the films that come to town, blah, blah, blah.
Hey,
so, yeah.
You can cut this out, but Chicago Med's the worst one.
Yeah.
The other two are better.
Oh, I think Tara likes Med. I think Fire is my least favorite.
That's our favorite.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, so perception is.
Yeah, like procedural shows, that's what these would be called, right? Anything Dick Wolf, they're just not my thing. It typically, to me, it's like they cast more on looks than the talent of the actor.
I can see that.
Right? Because it's more about the storyline and the formula that they've created. And, not saying they're not talented or whatever. There's a market for it, obviously. But to answer your question, I got on to Chicago Fire because I saw Claire Simon was doing a 2-day workshop at Chicago Actor Studio right over here. That's what was on my radar. It's like, oh, I can get some face-to-face time and work with Claire Simon. She can see what I do. What I'm doing is building a relationship or getting face-to-face time that the agent would not be doing. However, because of that, she contacted my agent and was like, hey, Chicago Fire, we got to audition for Timmy. I think he'd be great for this co-star in Chicago Fire. Bring him in. And I got that. I got an audition for a Jordan Peele horror movie that was being shot here. He was the producer on it. It was a remake of a 90s movie, Candyman.
I remember Candyman.
Yeah, Candyman. So Candyman, that came out last year, and I auditioned for a small role in that. And that's a lot of what I try to teach actors as well, is doing what you have control over, because so much of this is just sitting and waiting. And if you're just sitting and waiting, then, okay, there's a whole percentage of actors out there that are doing way more than that. And everybody will do their thing differently. But yeah, to answer your question, I got offered something that's called check avail, which is like, hold these dates because we want you for this role. This is not a job offer yet, but don't be looking at other dates just yet. For a series regular in a Netflix show, which is called Teenage Bounty Hunters. I don't know if it's in its second season or whatever. But the casting director for that, same thing. I utilize SAG-AFTRA Foundation and the opportunities they give to actors who are part of the union, and with casting directors that are outside of Chicago, I'm able to, have these workshops and do it. And based off of that, this conversation showing her a scene I had prepared. A week later, I get a call from an agent saying, "Hey, Jen Houston just called. You're on check avail for this. They want to see a tape." That was the first time ever I had someone call looking for me, having me hold the dates before even seeing a tape.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, yeah. So maybe a long-winded way that nobody would find. Well, I guess it's interesting,
No. It's
right?
Look,
but it's
everybody is interested in the, especially the high-profile industries that they don't understand. So, like the behind-the-curtain stuff on the acting side, I think is really interesting.
Yeah,
I bet our listeners will too. I'll tell you though, that type of proactive approach to your business is what separates great brokers from the ones I would call either unmotivated or somewhat lazy, that treat their business more like a hobby than a real business.
right.
There's a big difference between the ones that go out there and hustle and proactively try to find opportunities versus the ones that just wait for the phone to ring.
Yeah.
There's
a side hustler, would you call it that? Or maybe
Yeah,
not
that-
even that.
not
Or
even-
a hobbyist.
the hobby. Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be a better kind of the hobbyist. And yeah, so enough of that. Let's get back to
Creative negotiating.
Yeah, so I was probably in my 20s before I paid for a movie ticket. And do you remember how that went down?
What went down?
Like how we got that magic golden ticket.
There's a 10-year difference between you and I.
Mhm.
So I grew up not paying for a ticket. So it went away pretty quick when I was young, or middle school maybe. But
I don't even know when it went away. I think it went away when I went away
Oh, gotcha.
and had to pay for a movie ticket
Yeah.
in another community.
I think I was in middle school, if I remember correctly. But no, how did that go down?
Well, Dad was hired by Malco Theaters to help them relocate their movie theater. And so he brokered the deal. And when they relocated and did the big, because you may not remember this, but when we were kids,
It was in Lincoln Mall, right?
there were like 4 or 5 locations and they all had 2 screens. And so depending on what movie you wanted to see is where you would go.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I remember we'd have to look up in the newspaper what was playing, what time, and then we'd have to notice which location. So it's Lincoln
right.
Mall and Wesleyan Park Plaza and, the one downtown. And yeah, so when they did the big one, Dad was the broker on that deal. And he negotiated in, he's like, "Hey, I'd like a free pass." And I don't know how he did it. It'd be interesting to hear him tell this story if he remembers the details. But essentially, we had a golden ticket type pass where it didn't matter how many people were with us, and it didn't matter how often we used it. And it went on for at least 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that Dad was real specific about the language because this played out with something else in Nashville. Do you know about the one in Nashville?
No.
Right when I started working with Dad around 05, 06, he bought the Go Mini franchise, so the portable storage, and we sold his self-storage facility that was in Louisville on Crumbs Lane.
Okay.
And he took that money, he 1031 into properties in, I think, Memphis and Nashville, where we were going to do, or I say we, I was just kind of there in the room.
Sure.
But he was going to do Go Mini stuff. So he bought a property in Evansville and Memphis and Nashville. That was kind of his territory. Fast forward a few years, that property in Nashville, we didn't end up needing it for Go Minis, or I forget what happened. And one of these flight park where, instead of going to the airport and parking, you'll go park at this company. They'll take you right to the gate. They'll wash your car while you're gone. They'll charge you less for parking than, what the airport will. They'll change your oil. They'll do all this stuff if you want them to. And then they'll pick you up when you get there, and they'll take you right to your car, and it's a better experience of parking when you travel. Well, this place needed the property that Dad had, and he let them use it. And as part of the deal, he said, "We park for free forever." It's in the contract. And so whoever has this pass gets to park there for free, no expiration.
Wow.
It was just like was with the Malco theaters back when we were kids.
But no expiration.
Yeah, well, I don't think Malco had an expiration either. I think finally they just said enough.
Yeah, yeah.
They were done with Barron's and all their friends going to movies for free and stuff, I think finally they were just like enough, But that's still in place right now in Nashville.
Wow.
Which is why for the longest time I would always try to fly out of Nashville. Now there's so much construction, it's just easier to get to Louisville, and it's faster, a little bit faster for us to drive to Louisville to catch a flight instead of Nashville, but
yeah,
got to pay for the parking if I do that.
Pay for parking. I live in Chicago, so
yeah, you got to pay for parking everywhere.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
There's a bit of PTSD.
Yeah, so here's another one. Tower Place. So Tower Place is this strip center for our listeners in Owensboro, Kentucky. It's right across from Kentucky Wesleyan College on the main road that splits the town. It's a great location, and there's a big radio tower. I mean, it's a big old radio tower, thus Tower Place. And it's this L-shaped strip center on a lighted corner that our dad developed probably around 1990. For 20 or 25 years now, Great Harvest Bread Company has been a tenant there. And as part of their lease, our family gets a monthly credit every month for at least 20 years now.
Wow.
Now think about why this is really creative and smart for both Great Harvest and for Dad. And now that I've bought that center from Dad, it's actually, I'll tell you a funny story about Mom real quick.
Yeah.
Our mother is very particular, detail-oriented.
Yes.
All right. So the fact that we get this certain amount of monthly credit at Great Harvest, it is not a high priority for me to make sure every penny of that is spent for the good of the family or our friends or people we care about. Like, that's just not a high priority for me. So there are plenty of months.
You want to hit that limit?
There is leftover. And this isn't like rollover minutes back in the day. These are dollars that could have been spent there that go away at the end of every month. And I'm not going to take the time. I'm not detail-oriented enough to make sure that happens. And so, for a while there, Mom would call, check the balance, and she would give me a heads up. Hey, there's a week left. There's X amount of dollars left. And finally we were talking. I was like, Mom, why don't you just handle this? Like, if you want it, I'll just give you control over this credit monthly thing and do with it what you want.
Yeah.
And so she does now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every so often, like, my kids will come into town, and like my son who's at college, he'll come into town. He's like, hey, can I go by Great Harvest? I was like, yeah, just give Mimi a heads up that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Like, you're not asking her permission. Just let her know.
Yeah.
All right. And if for some reason there's a low balance or whatever, she can let you know, but just give her a heads up. It might affect her plans, but
yeah.
Yes, you can,
yeah.
kind of thing. So that's the great. But here's why this is a really smart way to negotiate. To Dad, when he was negotiating this lease, he wanted a certain amount of rent. The tenant did not want to pay as much rent. And so during the negotiations, Dad said, well, why don't we make the difference up? And my guess is, I don't know this is the case, but my guess is the amount of that monthly credit, it was the spread between where they were.
Sure.
The X amount of dollars. I bet that was the exact amount of the spread. So if Dad says, hey, look, you give me X amount of dollars of credit every month while you're here, and then we'll reduce the rent by that amount, the tenant ought to jump on that every time, because the amount of credit you're giving is X amount of dollars. That's the retail amount of that.
Right.
But it costs you that much
to
create that value. But the value that we're receiving as a family is that amount of dollars.